Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Lowy Institute. Welcome to Wednesday Lowy Lunch. I'm Michael Fullylove, the Director of the Global Issues Program here, and welcome to today's talk on the new multilateralism of climate change. We're in a weird political and global situation, I think, on this issue at the moment. We've witnessed an institutional failure, or at least I would categorise it as such. John may be milder, where the UN institutions that were set up to deal with these issues have not delivered the outcome that anybody wanted. At the same time, there's been a political shift where, partly in response to that institutional failure, a lot of people have thrown their hands up and said, look, it's all too difficult in countries as, you know, from the United States to Australia and elsewhere. At the same time, you've got a really increased media scrutiny on the science of climate change, and a very vocal and aggressive cohort of commentators on the right who are denying a lot of the climate science. And this has produced, I think, a sort of a moment of stasis where we're not really going anywhere. And yet, the really terrifying thing is that when you talk to the climate scientists, of course, they haven't changed their mind 1 nanosecond. And so the underlying science remains, its integrity remains, and the problem and the threat in the long term remains exactly as it always was. So that raises the question, where do we go now in light of these failures and in light of this new circumstance? What is the new multilateralism of climate change? To what extent will the old institutions play the role they need to, and what are the new institutions and the new alignments of interests and forces that might deliver change, policy change in response to climate change? And today I'm delighted that we're joined by a terrific speaker on this topic, John Connor. John and I have been colleagues for a long time. When I was at university, one of my jobs was working at an organisation called the Lawyers Reform Association, and John, I think at that time, was on the board of the Lawyers Reform Association. He's had a stellar career. He's a lawyer by training, but he's done a lot of interesting non-legal jobs, if I can put it that way. He's worked at the Nature Conservation Council of New South Wales, the Australian Conservation Foundation, World Vision. He was a staffer to an independent MP. He is somebody who knows both the science and the politics and the policy of this inside out. So can I welcome, please, John Connor, the CEO of the Climate Institute. Welcome, John.
Thank you, Michael, and thank you everyone for coming here today. I do want to acknowledge the traditional owners of the place where we meet today and pay my respects to elders past and present. I also want to acknowledge in particular 2 staffers at the Climate Institute who can't be here today, Erwin Jackson, Deputy CEO, and Will McGoldrick, who's Manager of Policy, both of whom have helped very much in this paper today, but also our work on climate policy and diplomacy. First, to introduce us, the Climate Institute, we're a non-partisan independent research organisation. We're dedicated to working with business, community and the government to deliver effective climate solutions. Our vision is for an Australia leading the world in the deployment of low carbon technology, policy, business practice and diplomacy. The Climate Institute recognises this is a global problem that requires a global solution, and as such we've got to focus on both on Australia's climate diplomacy as well as its domestic policies. Our focus for Australia has been on achieving a double dividend. We aspire to an Australia that's both competitive in the emerging global clean energy economy and cooperative in achieving effective global climate agreements. In the aftermath of Copenhagen, one of the ironies, in fact, is that the competitive reflexes appear to be outgunning the cooperative instincts as we race for a global low-carbon political economy. More on both later. But of course, Copenhagen capped off a disappointing month in terms of diplomacy and the domestic debate. For a brief 24 hours, there was bipartisan support for the emissions trading scheme embodied in the Turnbull-Rudd Agreement on the Carbon Pollution Reduction Scheme, the CPRS. The Climate Institute supported that agreement, not because it was the ideal scheme for reducing our climate pollution and encouraging investment in low carbon technologies, it wasn't, but it did provide the foundations of an effective, long, loud and legal price signal, a sound architecture and mechanisms to wind back or time limit what we did see as excessive transitional compensation to coal-fired generators and big polluting exporters. Contrary to popular perceptions, this was not a permanent handout machine for the big polluters. It required all of our biggest polluters to pay a price on carbon pollution. In our view, and those of others like Professor Garneau, of course, it handed too much back and didn't allow enough for low clean technology investment support or to assisting our developing country neighbours get on a lower carbon development pathway. But in the medium to long term, though, the scheme retained its potential to drive investment in clean technology and place an actual limit on overall climate pollution and bring it down over time in a predictable, transparent way. No other scheme can do that, not carbon taxes, not emissions intensity schemes, nor direct action schemes led by taxpayer-funded incentives. In our view, it provided the mechanism to reach the credible target of a 25% reduction of 2000 levels of Australia's climate pollution by 2020, and the much deeper reductions that we need beyond then by 2050, at least 90%, and in our view, indeed, we should be carbon neutral by then. But we also supported the CPRS because it carried a rare but precious premium of bipartisan support. It offered the potential for a historic settlement for action akin to those in Australia's political history, like that on Medicare. It was a settlement that offered a springboard for improvement, a settlement that took us out of the trenches of cultural and ideological warfare, seemingly so comfortable to many on the left and the right. Sadly, it was a settlement, of course, that shattered 24 hours later with consequences that were both obvious and are still emerging. Regardless, we moved on to Copenhagen. Now, we had hoped there that past experiences of meetings of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, the UNFCCC, if I may say so in future, like the dramas of Berlin, Kyoto and Bali before it, would have us at least falling across the line at the end of the meeting with the foundations of a new, fair, ambitious and legally binding post-2012 treaty. As Hugo Chavez said at Copenhagen, if climate change was a bank, it would have been saved already. Surely with all these world leaders at Copenhagen, it was too big to fail. But history didn't work out that way. Today I want to make three main points. Copenhagen didn't go backwards. Now, it didn't go forward as much as we would have liked, as much as was hyped, or even indeed hoped. But it didn't go backwards, primarily because of crucial misunderstandings and new developments